And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Christopher Johnston, trial attorney and founding member of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. He is also a lifelong UFOlogist and has completed certificate work in astrobiology and space law through the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, also known as UNOOSA. I'm making that up. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Anyways, we're going to be talking about the Roswell incident as if it was a jury trial and more. Christopher, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, before we get into Roswell, what can you tell us about the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs? What is that?
Sure. That was the question I had when I first saw the acronym, and you pronounce it, I think, the way that I do, UNOOSA. So the United Nations, when I first started getting into space, I'll tell you, I learned more about the United Nations than I ever knew before. And they have all kinds of different offices and things that they're responsible for, semi-responsible for. And one of them is the use of outer space. And so UNOOSA, there's 5 primary treaties called the Treaties of Outer Space, ranging from dealing with stranded astronauts to what's allowed and what's not allowed in outer space. So now recently, by recently, perhaps last 10 years, we're seeing more private companies, private actors coming into that realm of space law. But ultimately, UNOOSA oversees and promulgates different rules and regulations for the fair use of outer space. That's what they're really essentially tasked with. One of the challenges, I don't know how versed you are in international law, but when you're dealing with treaties like the Treaties of Outer Space, in my opinion anyway, they tend to be fairly toothless. So you and I can have an agreement that we're not going to go do A, B, and C, but you go and do A and C, and there's very little that can be done about it. So that's really kind of where the UN is, and they're trying their darndest, to keep their thumb on everything that's going on in outer space. But what I'm observing, countries are not necessarily going rogue, but the treaties, particularly the mining, on the moon, which isn't supposed to be allowed, extracting anything of value, from outer space for their own private use is one of the cruxes that isn't supposed to be occurring, and we are certainly seeing that. So the United Nations offers these certificate courses, for folks like me, or you don't have to be a lawyer. If you have any interest, you can simply go to the UN, and it walks you right through on what their coursework is. And so what I did was an interview, or pardon me, sort of an introduction and then deeper dive into different elements of space law. And again, it's anybody can take that course.
Now, are you saying that they are already mining the moon?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you keep your ear to the street and you start hearing the whispers and rumors, what I have heard, so this and a quarter, right, is China is discussing, actively discussing mining on the moon. I haven't heard that it's happening, and I'm not, you'll hear about, what's China doing on the dark side of the moon? I'm not getting into that. I'm just simply saying from the more factual standard, that is, discussion that's occurring.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I just saw a post on X or Facebook or somewhere about China mining helium on the dark side of the moon. But as you know, on the internet, you never know what's true or not.
Exactly. And we'll probably get to that more. That is one of the very reasons that I'm doing the work that I'm doing, as far as trying to provide people with the tools on how to weigh evidence and how to look at credibility of different issues. Because as you just said, sure, it's on the internet, must be a thing. Mm-hmm. So I like giving people sort of a framework to be able to step back and go, I don't know about that.
You also studied astrobiology. At first, I would think, how is that even a thing? Because science doesn't even recognize life outside of this planet.
Right. Well, and that's one of the very, if not the seminal things that that astrobiologists have to determine. They, if you're going to go looking for life elsewhere, you have to define what is life. So, for good or bad, the only format that we have is life on Earth. So scientists try to agree, okay, we're looking for life. What quantifies, or what are we looking for? And then they have to apply these Earth-based solutions, because right now it's all we have, right? So if you want a scientific look at it, you can't just sort of dream things up, right? So the astrobiologists have to determine what exactly is life when they're out there, they're looking for it. My particular interest in astrobiology is the really old stuff, the 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, what was going on Earth. And there was a recent study that just came out. I should back that up just a little bit. I don't know if you know, I wrote an article called the Infratempestrial Hypothesis. And the name, it's a bit of a play on words. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Masters, who's in Montana. Okay, so he has a theory called the extratempestrials, which is beyond us in time. So for a bit of wordplay, I went with the infratempestrials being before us or under us in time. But Dr. Masters, in short, he contends that perhaps extraterrestrials who are coming to Earth now are simply us humans, but time traveling back. It is essentially his theory in a nutshell. And I like it a lot. It's a bit of a different approach. But looking at, again, the 3.5, 4 billion years ago, what was going on Earth? Well, the rock record is kind of incomplete, from way back then. But I got to thinking, well, depending on how we evolved way back then, isn't it just as possible that extraterrestrials are simply us from then that had the technology to leave, and they're coming back now? So similar to Dr. Masters, but my theory eliminates the need for time travel. So looking at kind of an Occam's razor approach, which being more likely, next to impossible to say, but I don't know if you heard, and I believe this was out of Denmark, within the last 2 months, I'll say, a study came out where scientists starved a cell from glucose, in which it would typically use as its energy source. And they kind of thought, well, what's going to happen? So they starved it of, again, I believe it was glucose, sort of force-fed it a different energy source, because every cell needs an energy source. So they switched the energy source of these cells, and they took to them, and these scientists are saying that they, in short, created super stem cells by changing the energy source of that particular cell. Well, we know when life really came to be here on Earth, that had to do, again, with using the same energy source, but not all cells use the same thing. There are cells that will eat rock to get its power. So my question in helping support, I think, the infratempestrial theory is, well, let's query what would happen if all these single cell organisms had a different energy source 3.5 billion years ago as opposed to now. Well, scientists have proven they're going to react differently. So who's to say different energy source 3.5 billion years ago, different end result for those organisms once they grew? So that was looking at it from an astrobiological standpoint, that's how those two or three things kind of tie together.
Do you agree with the panspermia theory?
I think there's a lot of validity to the panspermia theory. Now, I don't know about directed panspermia, where it was, coming intentionally sent to Earth. Do I think it's very possible that life on Earth came via panspermia through amino acids in a meteorite? Sure. I think that's a very possible, a very plausible explanation.
As a trial attorney, you're used to looking at facts. And if you just look at the UFOlogy phenomenon for as an overwide, as in the big picture, is there enough evidence out there, in your opinion, that the UFOs are real?
Strictly evidence-based, I believe so. I think that I could put on a trial tomorrow that based strictly on evidence, and I have to hedge a little bit because you don't know how your witnesses are going to present, right? So, and that's a big deal. But taking the number of sightings, the number of recoveries, the sheer number of witnesses, I believe that could be a winning case.
You wrote a book called Roswell, The Truth on Trial, where basically you look at the Roswell case from a trial attorney's perspective. So if we can imagine that we're here on trial, can you lay out the facts for us?
Sure. So in my book, yes, so typically as a civil trial lawyer, the parties involved are the plaintiff, and I am a plaintiff attorney 99% of the time, and then the defendants, being the other guy, the at-fault party, if you will. So for purposes of this book, I broke it into believers and skeptics, because there's nobody inherently right or wrong. And in fact, the crux of the book is presenting information. The narrative of the story is told through the testimony, and probably outing myself, I don't take a position, in the book, so it's all being presented again. And I should mention, the narrative of the book being told via the testimony itself was all taken from previous interviews or affidavits that the various players gave. So my book is based on real information. Now, still, you have to apply the rules of evidence, and take that route. But I think it's important for people to know I didn't make up anything that any of my witnesses said, herein.
And basically, I think what you're saying is you are not the judge, but the reader is the jury.
That is correct. And that's exactly right. In a court of law, not everybody understands everybody's roles. The judge is the decider of law. If there's a legal question, the judge decides it. The jury, they're the finders of fact. They are the ones that are deciding UFO or weather balloon or that guy's fault. So, right. So the book is simply, well, not simply, it's also interesting for people that have any kind of interest in the trial process, because the book even begins right from getting your jury summons to having it explained by the clerk of court how you got picked, why you're there, what's even going on. So I tried to also make it somewhat educational for any of the budding attorneys out there or people that really like legal thrillers, but maybe don't quite understand the backbone of a trial and how that's included. In fact, unfortunately, because of the time and whatnot, because it's a book, there are certain evidentiary little moves within the book that probably would not be allowed were we in real trial, but I needed to get evidence in, and work around that.
Obviously, we don't have time to cover the entire book, but let's start with your most compelling evidence for one side. We'll start for the side for the believers. What is the most compelling evidence that you have that this really happened?
The most compelling evidence, I believe, is the testimony of Mac Brazel himself. The first one, the rancher who first came upon the materials. The reason being, again, not ever having met any of these folks, I can only assume sort of manner and demeanor and that kind of thing. But Mr. Brazel had no interest in the matter whatsoever. He didn't make money from it. He was simply, as a trial lawyer, what you would want to see. Just a normal guy going about his day, and he came across some stuff. That's very compelling. Yeah, I could, as I worked on the book and thought about if I were to cross-exam Mr. Brazel, that'd be tough. He stuck to his story from day one. He said, hey, I was out on the ranch. I found this stuff. It was really weird. He then next took it to a woman, a neighbor lady by the name of Loretta Proctor. I think Miss Proctor would also be great evidence because she would corroborate Mr. Brazel's testimony. Because once you get beyond those two, well, then you're into the government, right? And you're into the military and who's doing what and saying what. So those first two witnesses, Brazel and Proctor, I would, if I were representing the believers today, would spend 90% of my time on those two. Because with the military folks, for right or wrong, it would be relatively easy to undercut them, either direction that you wanted to take on it. And not necessarily because anything that they did, but because of who they are. We have a Captain Cavett on base during Roswell. He was a counterintelligence agent. Okay, well, it'd be pretty easy to cross any counterintelligence agent. And again, not like he's a bad guy or did anything, but just based on what we know counterintelligence agents do, you could really have, make some hay with that. So again, on the believer side, I would stick with Brazel and Proctor.
In Brazel's testimony, did he say anything about finding non-human biologics?
No, he did not. Not that I ever have seen, heard, or read, or came across in my research. So, and that's an interesting point. Kind of leads me to the other side. If I were representing the skeptics in this matter, boy, I would spend an awful lot of time on the folks who said they saw any kind of bodies or biologics, because there's a lot there that would really undercut them. Walter Haut, I don't know if you've come across his name, but he was the public information officer at Roswell. And he did an affidavit in 1993 where he was asked about, what he knew and this and that and the other thing. Well, then he was asked to do an affidavit in 2002. And in that 9 years, the affidavits changed to now including, I saw some bodies. So I go through in the book, kind of show how an attorney would attack that. And let's face it, people's memories do not get better over time. They get worse over time. And you're telling me 9 years later that, oh yeah, I forgot there were some bodies there. So that is, I would hammer that point.
Just to let people know, an affidavit is basically a statement sworn under oath?
Correct. Yep. A signed sworn statement that I, Chris Johnston, this, and this. It's sworn testimony. That's really what it is.
Well, what did Mac Brazel say that he did see?
Said that he saw what we often hear, the metal that was able to be, bent up and would just go back into its natural shape. It couldn't be torn. It couldn't be burned. It's just very unusual metal. Very early on, discussion of hieroglyphs being on the metal started popping up pretty early in this whole investigation. But I never saw that Mr. Brazel himself said that. So to be intellectually honest, if I was really going to stick with Brazel as my key knockout witness that this was real, I would really, I would ask him if he saw it. He would say no, that he didn't see it, and then you'd have it set up for the rest of the trial, to try to support your position back on whether this stuff existed or not.
Was he the only non-government person that saw the craft?
Well, Loretta Proctor, who the neighbor that he took it over,
she saw it as well.
She saw it as well. And then there was a couple of young men, William Woody, who was 14 at the time, who alleged from a distance he and his dad saw, metals laying on the field. And that's a great question, Jeff. Which non-military, we have Brazel, we have Jesse Marcel's family later said that he brought some of the material home with him and showed it to them before he, took it onto the base the rest of the way.
Jesse was a neighbor or something?
Oh, I'm sorry, Jesse Marcel. If you can picture the famous Roswell picture of the military gentleman kneeling down, holding the material that was found, that's Jesse Marcel. And Jesse was one of the, I believe he was a major, yeah. And he was the very first guy that said, hey, this is a UFO. So Jesse Marcel took materials home and then took it on the rest of the way to where he was supposed to take it. So total number, I don't know, but they do exist. Small number of folks alleged to have seen it.
Is it possible that Mac didn't see some of the details of the metals and the hieroglyphics because he didn't really examine the metal or didn't, take it home with him or anything like that?
Sure, that's possible. But then putting on my defense lawyer hat for just a minute, you mean to tell me, Mr. Brazel, you had such a fantastic find in your hands that you'd never seen it before and you took it to the neighbor? Yep, that's all true. That's all true. But you didn't examine it close enough to see what was on it. So, yeah, good point, Jeff, and very well could be what happened. But again, lawyer hat, fairly easy to undercut there.
Looking at this whole phenomena and speaking to you, it's very interesting that he never mentioned bodies. I know I'm going back to that, but I mean, to me, that would be something that would be obvious. Unless they had, as you know, like from a car accident, maybe the bodies flew a couple 100 feet away and he just didn't find them.
Right. And I've never been to the crash site, but, I have seen it on TV and interviews and whatnot. And I don't have the exact specifics, but yeah, the debris field was huge.
Oh, okay.
And so it very well could be, Mr. Brazel comes out and I just be a normal guy for a minute. Sure, I'd find some of this. I probably would end my investigation after I had a handful of it and holy cow, this stuff's everywhere and probably would have split. So I think that'd be a very understandable reaction.
Do you know what the size of the debris field was?
I don't have that number offhand, but even just taking any kind of a Cessna at speed that is to crash, you're going to have quite a debris field. But again, I don't know the specifics on it.
Now let's take it from the viewpoint of the skeptics. What can you give us from there?
From the skeptics, I like General Ramey, who sat at the top of this entire pile of players. And Ramey says, absolutely, it was a weather balloon from Project Mogul. There were a couple other people that had testified the same. The reason I like Ramey as a skeptic, you don't get to where General Ramey was by being a crackpot. First of all, the guy brings a lot of credibility and a lot of credentials to what he was saying. He acknowledged that he was aware of the original press release that came out that said the U.S. Army Air Force had a disc, and he did the only thing that he could do. He owned it and he said, yep, it was a mistake. It was a weather balloon. So he did all the right things, which I would expect. But this is where, boy, wouldn't it be nice to have these folks on the stand and see how General Ramey himself, how he comes across. Is there anything there? But, in my real line of work, if you have a case involving the police, for example, they always show up in their uniforms and, every medal and commendation that they've ever gotten, because it can be quite convincing to a jury. So Ramey never talked about it a lot other than to say, yeah, we made a mistake. And then he sort of let the other experts speak for themselves, the other folks who were contending it was this weather balloon. But I think General Ramey would be my lead and sort of differentiate, yeah, Mac Brazel, he's a great, nice guy, but we got General Ramey with years of experience and this and that. And if I were on the defense, nobody's going to attack the other side. It will just be simply to point out their inconsistencies. And that's what I would do. And I would rely on good old General Ramey because he runs the whole deal and he can explain why everybody else is a crackpot or whatever route he wants to go with that.
And plus, we just got out of World War II and it's 1947 and it's a completely different time from now. And so If the government said this is what it is, I would think people just accepted it.
Right. And wouldn't that be interesting to have a 1950s trial versus a 2025 trial with the changes just in society as a whole and the way people look at these things? Yeah, that'd be very interesting. Impossible, but it would be very cool.
I'm assuming that you can never completely get away from wearing the attorney hat. So when you're going through Facebook or any other of these social platforms, what do you think about all the UFO information that's out there, and how do you sort through it and determine for yourself what's real and what's not?
Good question. As my mom, one of her big lines, consider the source, right? And she's right. That's always my threshold question is, all right, who posted this? Where is this coming from? And try to, and of course, I'm not saying every UFO thing that hits my desk, I do these deep dives on it, but the things that pop up that are a little more questionable, I reverse engineer it, right? Okay, who posted it? And before it was posted, who said it? And who reported on that original saying, and try to work in reverse. And I can only really leave myself with sort of a, it's possible, or it's, looks crazy to me. But yeah, after, this is coming up on my 25th year of my practice of law, it is hard to take off the lawyer hat. Even when we think we're not being lawyerly, my wife would tell you otherwise. So reverse engineering it. And then again, you looking at the sources. Now, one of the challenges is with, we all are living in this day and age of conspiracy theories and nobody can be trusted, that kind of thing. So it's challenging when pieces come up that are posted either, typically by former government employees, because you tend to want to believe it. It carries that credibility with it. But then, I got to stop and, hey, are we dealing with disinformation here for some kind of reason? So on that topic, I will just leave you with again, my mom's good comment, is consider the source and start working backwards. And I've also found by doing that, a lot of what comes out that may seem a little bit like quackery tends to be repeated quackery with new headlines, but you go and you look at what's actually being posted. And it's like, well, yeah, I read this article 4 years ago, so just have to do your due diligence.
Do you take an interest in all these congressional hearings and what's going on in Washington? And if so, what are your thoughts about it?
To a certain extent, I do. I don't know. Are you familiar with Danny Sheehan?
I know of him. I haven't had him as a guest.
Okay, so Danny is an attorney, and his career, he did a lot with a lot of environmental torts, kind of things, cases back against the government. So Mr. Sheehan has something going right now called the New Paradigm Institute, and using his legal background and his team of lawyers, they are trying to force disclosure, is really kind of what they are all about. So for the congressional hearings, and as I said, consider the source, I stay pretty close to Mr. Sheehan on his findings of those. I will say, yes, if Mr. Sheehan says this is the way that these hearings are going, or this is what I'm seeing, I take that at face value. He brings that kind of credibility. I'd never have reason to question him.
Has anything with these hearings been surprising or really noteworthy to you?
Not to me. And I will say I follow the overviews, the thumbnails of the congressional hearings, and some of it sounds interesting, sounds pretty cool, but then you back it up and, well, it's more hearsay or it's more unsubstantiated claims. So, and that's where it's good to wear the lawyer hat, right? Oh, this is really neat. Well, do not take that at face value. If you listen to what's being said, I could tell you all day, well, I've been told that my friend saw. It doesn't matter how great this story is. It's hearsay, it's inadmissible. And where's friend? Why isn't friend here telling, the rest of Congress about it? Now, at a 30,000 foot look, it's fantastic that these congressional hearings are happening, no matter what is being said, right? the fact that the UFO UAP subject is being taken seriously enough that there's repeated congressional hearings, there could be really nothing wrong with that, right? We just have to be careful, and we'll make up a fake time frame that a year from now we don't hear, well, we did all these congressional hearings, and as you can see, it was all hearsay, nothing to see here, and are the hearings part of disinformation? Let the people think that they're being heard, that kind of thing, but nothing will come out of it. So I think they're interesting. They're very good that they're happening, but I haven't seen anything yet that's left me going, whoa, that's all brand new information to me, and it's firsthand, and there's a photograph, that I haven't seen anything like that.
Do you think we're ever going to get full open disclosure?
I don't know if we'll get full open disclosure, but I'm of the mindset that when disclosure occurs, it's going to be because an event occurs that the government will not be able to lie about, deceive about, misdirect about. It's going to be something as plain on its face that you and I, Jeff, can go, I don't care what the government, I don't care what anybody says. I've long said, and I don't think this is what's going to happen, but boy, wouldn't it be great if 1,000 ships were 100 feet off the ground and they flew from the East Coast to the West Coast, right? No question. Everybody sees it, everybody's done, and then we don't need, to listen to the government. So my comment about full disclosure, let's say that ridiculous scenario happens. Well, now we all know, because we've seen these UAPs. I still don't think that the government would then turn around and go, oh yeah, about those, here's a bunch of secret materials from all the past. I think they would still just sit on it, because at that point, everybody knows they're real. So why should the government show their hand that they were deceiving us for all these years? So I don't think we'll ever have full disclosure via the government, but I think disclosure will come via an event that cannot be ignored.
It seems to me that it's all up to the ETs and whether they want to disclose themselves.
Right. I would agree. And that's what I mean by an event that can't be denied. It's not going to be something fantastic that we do. And that ties in. I know there isn't a question about it on the table, but the whole, do you think they mean us harm? Do you think, bad things are... My position, I'm of the camp, if they wanted to do something, they'd have done it. And if they wanted to, there's nothing we can do about it. So, move on.
Did you pay attention to the New Jersey drones last December? And if so, what is your take on it?
I did. And, we all have our specific real areas of interest that we follow. I was intrigued by that story, but again, what did we almost immediately start hearing? Oh, it's fine. It's drones. The FAA knows about it. My opinion on that, it was immediately disinformation. I haven't heard an answer yet that I'm satisfied with as to what it was. So I found it intriguing, but more frustrating than anything, seems to me. And again, this will show perhaps my aeronautical ignorance. It seems to me that there would have been somebody in New Jersey, like some old friend of mine, that would have, taken one of these out, or something would have been done. And it seems like next to nothing was done, except it was reported over and over and over with a couple different versions coming out of the government is what it is. But yeah, it was very interesting for sure.
I didn't mention it in the beginning, but you also are involved with MUFON. Are you an investigator? Yes.
I'm not an investigator. I'm a member of MUFON Midwest chapter, and I do a fair amount of writing for MUFON for their magazines. We mentioned My Rules of Federal Evidence. That was a MUFON. Infratempestrial Theory was also MUFON. And I have another piece coming out, I think next month, dealing with famous disinformation cases and agents and things like that. And that article is actually, well, they're all very interesting, but that one's kind of neat because of what we are currently dealing with, people pointing fingers about who's disinformation and not. So again, in that article, I don't take a position and say, Bob Smith is a disinformation guy. Rather, I lay out a couple of prior cases and how these folks were caught and just how the evidence was viewed. Again, a framework for people to be able to go, oh, maybe, and this is how the courts do it, or this is how, lawyers would go about it. So, yeah, the MUFON, I would love to be an investigator, but currently running my law firm and, raising almost adult kids. So I have not yet become a field investigator for MUFON.
Do you think you would ever like to be one?
Yes. Yes.
I think you could be great at it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it would be, I was in Sedona with my wife just this past year, and we went on a UFO sighting exploration. We had a tour guide and the whole bit. It was really cool. Did not believe everything that she said, but if nothing else, you're out there and you're keeping your eyes on the skies, and if you don't look up, you're never going to see.
How did an attorney like you get interested in UFOs in the first place?
A little bit self-defense, I think. My late father, for myriad of reasons, was always a big UFO guy. And as a little kid, as a parent now, I can look back and see how this might not have been the greatest parenting, but frequently my dad would say, I think tonight's the night. And what he meant, he wanted nothing more than a UFO to land in the backyard. And I remember and I'd be like, well, what are you going to, he's like, I'll go straight on there. I'm going to take me with you. Well, when you're 6, you're sure that is the night that your dad is going to be gone forever. Right. So it evolved as a mutual interest. He was more of the science fiction kind of mind about it. And for me, it was really, I don't want to be scared every single night. So that's really where it started. And then probably like a lot of your listeners, I've read everything I can get my hands on. I've watched everything that I can get my eyes on. And then as I started figuring out a way to incorporate my real career as an attorney into my passion, which is UFOlogy, so things like my book and writing for MUFON and whatnot became sort of a natural fit. But yeah, first got into it because I was a scared little kid.
If we get back to your book, it appears that the majority of the evidence of the crash itself, like hieroglyphics and bodies and whatever else there is from the government and not from Mac Brazel or his neighbor. Is that correct?
I'm trying to think. Jesse Marcel, he referenced the hieroglyphs on the material. Yeah, you're right. Most of the strangeness, if you will, the whole thing is strange, right? But you get into the minutia, the smaller strangenesses, and yeah, that did start popping up through folks in the government. And I hadn't really considered that point, Jeff, but yeah, you're right.
Is it possible that those facts were given as some sort of disinformation? Or not due to the timing?
Having not considered that angle, that would be one, and having never run a disinformation campaign, I can see that being really effective. And let's say I was a dirty defense lawyer for just a moment, to slip something like that in and see what direction just that piece of information ends up taking. Because certainly you get that in early on, now you're at trial, like you are with my book, and you have created an automatic and a significant issue, right? If you have Mac Brazel saying, oh, nice and shiny, and you got somebody else saying, looks like a infinity sign stamped on the side or what have you. Yeah, you've created an issue from the get-go. Absolutely.
Is it possible that the entire incident truly was some sort of weather balloon and the whole thing is a disinformation story against the Soviets?
Well, first let me say anything is possible, right? However, we talked a little bit about the debris field here a little bit ago. And in my book, I have a photograph of a gentleman holding one of the Project Mogul balloons. The thing was tiny. I mean, relatively speaking, I just don't. So here's a fact. We talked about facts. Something crashed. So we know that is a fact. Both sides are saying, yeah, there was something. The divergence comes and, as far as what crashed. So we have the fact that absolutely something crashed. And where were we going with that, Jeff?
Well, I'm just trying to see if it could possibly be, some sort of disinformation story
Right.
against the
Right.
Soviets.
Sure. As it comes to the Soviets, I don't know that necessarily would have been the issue. A disinformation campaign in some other format, I absolutely could see that being the case, but it hasn't really come up. There's been no finger pointing, right? It's just simply, well, it's Project Mogul, the weather balloon project. So I don't think there was an element of, pointing a finger at another country, which, certainly does happen. That was, what was that called? Operation Infection. It's infection with a K, and that was actually back in the 80s, where the Soviet Union alleged that HIV was created by the United States, as this chemical warfare kind of thing. And they pointed the finger directly at the United States. Never having seen anything like that, I wouldn't think that would be the scenario, right? You'd want to blame somebody if that's what you were going about. And they weren't blaming, they were just simply saying weather balloon. Now, as we flesh that out a little bit, if it was a UFO, what are we told is the most important thing about that is the technology. So if you had that, I suppose you certainly wouldn't want to point the finger at any other country, because then they might get jammed up. Hey, what does the United States have? You simply couch it as, hey, nothing to see here, and now you've got the technology to go deal with as you wish. So I guess as we flesh that through, I wouldn't see it as, directed towards, messing with any other country. If it is, it would be to protect the technology from that other country, if you will.
I guess I'm just thinking, if they had this story like, hey, we found a UFO, and then the next day, well, it actually wasn't a UFO, it was something else. Maybe the Soviet Union would have interpreted it as they did find something, and maybe now they're going to have a weapon that's far superior to ours. You know what I mean? To even just kind of create some fear within them.
Sure. Yeah, and Jeff, I hadn't considered that angle. It'd be, we could talk about that one for hours. That would be a very interesting approach, and not beyond the pale. I like that.
I don't know if you've heard Trump's recent statement about how we have a weapon that's so powerful that it's far beyond what anybody else has. But it's kind of like along the same line is what I'm getting at.
Maybe a bunch of saber rattling, you're saying? Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
What is the biggest takeaway someone should get from reading your book?
The biggest takeaway should be a framework for analyzing evidence. This is said very, very simply. And, in this day and age, it's probably come out of my mouth already today, but with the conspiracy theories, presumably the conspiracy theories and the internet and, all these different things, just apply some critical thinking. It is really, how many of our problems could be resolved if folks, even if you arrive at the wrong conclusion or the wrong answer, wouldn't it be great if everyone stopped and thought through what the heck they're talking about or what this theory is that they're putting forth? And again, even if your theory is completely different than mine, if we've both done our research and we've both thought about it, we can have a really good-natured discussion about it. So that's what my hope is. And that's why I took, the 70-plus-year-old mystery, right, and applied it. Because what we do as lawyers, you can do all day, every day, as far as, weighing things out and how we look at it, and don't just accept it because Chris Johnston says it or Jeff says it, just stop and think. Perhaps at least what I tell my kids, think about what you're doing here.
If people want to find out more about your book, should they go to a website or Amazon?
Yep. Best place to go is at my personal website for my office. I have an office, by the way, in Minneapolis, and then an office in Des Moines, Iowa. And if they were to go to Law Group of Iowa, Real simple, lawgroupofiowa.com. On the homepage, about halfway down, is a big red button that says, "Buy Roswell, the Truth on Trial." And that'll take you directly to the proper link. And I do like to point out, since my book is, a historical look, I also have a law museum here in my office, and a lot of the exhibits are available online. I have legal paraphernalia from around the world. So it's kind of cool and fun, but the best place to get the book is at Law Group of Iowa.
Have you ever been down to the Roswell Museum?
I have not, and that is next summer, or actually this coming summer. My wife has conceded we're going, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty cool. I would say if you get the chance, go around July 4th because they have the UFO festival as well.
Well, I have heard that, yeah. So, and shameless plug, the MUFON convention in Cincinnati, I think, is later that month, July 17th, that weekend right in there. So folks are looking for a July of UFO activities. There you go.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Not all evidence is created equal, right? As I said before, consider the source and do some of your own investigation before you glom onto a theory and put it out there as true or your own. Just not all evidence is the same.
Christopher, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.